One thing you might find yourself doing when you start developing in PHP is creating a PHP info file so that you can see what's going on in your application. So, for example, you might want to see all the configuration settings in your PHP environment. So this video is going to be about embedding this into a page and doing that using a Cake plugin and helper. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do, this is a blank CakePHP environment. I'm going to use bin cake bake, and I'm going to bake a controller. I'm going to call it the info controller, and I'm just going to say don't create any default actions. And in my controller, which is the info controller, I'm going to create a public function called show, and in my templates folder, I'm going to put the name of the controller in, and then the name of the action as a PHP file. So we can call this PhpInfo Plugin Demo. Alright, so theoretically, if I've done all that right, I can specify info as the controller and show, and it's displaying, which is good. Now, the next step is we want to be able to echo out PHP info to this page. So we're going to use a thing called a CakePHP plugin, and we're going to put the functionality in there so we can share it. So bin cake bake plugin, and it's going to be PHP info plugin, and we're going to say yes. And at this moment it says, do you want to overwrite the composer JSON? And just so that you can see what it's doing when it's doing the overwrite, just have a look at these auto load sections when we say yes, and all it's doing is adding in the PHP namespace so that you can refer to things within your application that are in the plugins directory. Okay, so we now have a plugin created. Now, if you're familiar with CakePHP, there's this concept known as helpers, and a helper provides functionality to views. So in a template, if you have a look at this PHP, you can see that where it says this HTML, that's a helper, and it's echoing out a character set. This one's doing a meta div. This one's echoing out style tags or style links to different files, and so on and so forth. So we're going to use our own custom helper to display our PHP info in this page, the show page. So to get started with that, firstly we're going to create a helper, and the helper name is going to be the info helper, and we're going to place the helper inside our plugin directory. So where that is in plugins, PHP info, and if we open up the src folder and then we say, okay, it's PHP info, we can see that it's created the view folder and then the info PHP file. Now to get something that we can use to echo things out to the screen or display things on the screen, we need to put in a public function. I'm going to call it display. And then in here is where we're going to put the code that echoes out our PHP info. Now, one of the ways of doing that is we can use OB, so we call output buffer, and we want to start it. And then we want to say PHP info So we're going to output PHP info into the output buffer, and then we go again PHP info, creating a variable here, and we go ob get contents of the output buffer. And then finally, we want to erase and turn off output buffering here, ob end clean. And then if we simply now return our PHP info, that is pretty much what we need to do to get something displaying. Let's do that. Now, we currently in this file, we don't have what we need to be able to use our helper. So we're now going to just make some quick changes. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to, if we type in this, we want to be able to autocomplete. So I'm just going to get that working. So I'm going to say var, and then it's going to be app view, and associate it with this. Okay, so now I can go this, and it will give me autocomplete. So I'm just going to say load helper. Now the helper that I'm loading is PHP Info Plugin, and the name of the helper is the Info Helper. So that now pulls in this functionality here. Now I could simply do this as well. I can say, okay, well, this info, and then it's display, which is the value, which is calling this, and this will work. So let's go and have a look. It should just show our PHP info straight in there. That's good. However, it's nice to be able to autocomplete this as well. So let's go and fix that. So we go into app view, and just above the class we have this here. So if we say property, and we can say, okay, it's PHP info, and then it auto completes to there. So we're just saying this property in this class will be, this info property will be of this info helper type. So now what we should be able to do is we just delete this bits. It should now show our property there, which has got the correct type. And then when we go one step further, we now have the display working as well. So again, no change, it's working fine. So that might be all that you want to do. It seems like it's good. The only thing is it seems to be centered. Maybe you don't want that, or maybe you want to start to modify things a little. So what we're going to do now is just have a look at the page source, and we can see that it's actually putting in a complete HTML document in the middle of the page, and you might not care that that's the case, but we can also start to maybe just pull part of the page out of there. So if we grab some code, which I did earlier, and go into our helper, info helper, and just pop this in here. So what this is going to do, maybe we can break this over a few lines. It's basically going to say, look for that center div, and then grab everything in between it, and then just replace everything in that PHP info variable with just what we've saved in between that div. Basically, it's pulling the middle out of the document. Let's try that again. And now we've lost all our styling, so that's not so good. So we might just, for a moment, reload. Actually, we could just go in here, couldn't we? So we've got our styling here. Let's go and just grab this here. Now, if we wanted to, we might just undo that. We could do something like PhpInfo equals a here doc, and then create maybe a div with an ID of PhpInfo and PhpInfo variable in here, and then div, and then say here. Now at the moment that looks really bad, so we might just change the maybe one back. That's it. Okay, so there we can do that. We can maybe reload, and now we've got it working in that way, but that's still not a very cake way of doing it, and we're embedding this and we've got no highlighting, so we're doing the job, but it's still not exactly the way we might want to do it. So we might let's take all our styling out, and we can go back to our plugin, go into our web root and create a new folder. So we're going to serve an asset from our plugin, and it's going to be, we could name it anything, but let's call it styles.css, and let's just put in to this all our CSS from the PhpInfo file, and we now can go into here and say, okay, well, let's use another helper, which is the HTML helper, and tell it about this phpinfo.styles file. And we don't just want it to be put into the body, we want to put it into the standard CSS block. And so if we now reload, maybe to make sure that we're and empty the cache just to make sure it is. And if we have a look in our head of our document, we can see that it's now pulling in the styles from the PhpInfo plugin. Now that's pretty good. We've come a long way. It just seems that there's something weird with the so we've got this milligram styling for some unknown reason is completely wrong. So I'm just going to just put it anywhere, but let's just put it here, padding left, and we know from the other styles it might be 4 pixels roughly, and just see if we can empty cache and hard reload, and that's fixed that. Okay, so you could really play around with it and make it exactly the way you wanted to. Things such as, seems like our headings have gone left aligned as well. We might want to fix those. So maybe take that and just put center. See if you have things correctly in their correct files, they sort of render a lot nicer. All right, so, and give that a reload. Yeah. And now we can see there's still a little bit of ugliness there because we have a hard-coded width somewhere. So I'm just going to search for width. Okay, okay. We'll call that 100% HR. Let's try the other one. 300, there we are, and this one 100%, so it'll fully fill up whatever parent it is. Just make sure we empty in hard reload. Right, there we go. So that is embedding a PHP info page into a page. One thing to keep in mind, if you don't want to show all the information, go into your PHP info method and then just use the particular sections that you want, and then reload, and you'll find that it's just got the particular sections that you've got credits and I think that's it. What was it? License and credits. Yeah, there it is. All right, so that's now moved your PHP info embedding into a plugin. Now let's look at how we're going to make that into a reusable thing that we can use in other projects. So what we can do, this particular repo at the moment is not a Git repository, but what I'm going to do is go into PHPInfo here and go and create Git init, and then before we get too far with the Git init, what we want to do is, with our plugin, we want to go into here, go README, and we've got installation using Composer. Now see how it says your name here? We might fix that. So we're going to say Togonation, and that's given the project a name. License is okay. So we want to change that. So that's that. Now we're going to have to make some changes to this as well, but usage, I think, embeds the output of PHP. Oh, we can do this, PHP info into a cake new. And the usage is, I suppose we would firstly have after making sure the PHP info module is loaded, this in a view template, and then just copy maybe that. So that can be the example. And make sure it's got syntax highlighting there. Okay. And we might give it some VS Code type hinting information. So in at view P, so src view app view, I think it is. We might, oops, let's go and find that. So this, right, and we just put that in as PHP, and then we might say in template, then we want maybe and oops, we just missed that out. Copy. All right. Now this add the at var line. Okay. All right, so that's a very rudimentary README. We've got everything. We've got usage. Okay, installation. Now we might come back to that because I think it's going to be slightly shell. Okay, so we've now created a plugin. Let's go git status, git add, let's add everything, git commit, and we're going to call it initial commit. And before we get too far forward, we're correctly named. Let's close all these files, and then we're committed to that. Now, we've just made a git. If we have a look at this git status, we've got a git repository of our plugin directory. Now I'm going to publish it to my public repository, but I'm going to change the name, just make it PhpInfo and send it to my GitHub. And there it goes. So it's been published to my GitHub. Let's open it on GitHub so that we've got it there. And now we're going to destroy our application. We just removed our PhpInfo directory. So we also want to get rid of references to PhpInfo in our composer.json. We don't want these classes because they'll poison things in the end. Very good. And what else do we need to do? Okay, I think that's everything. Now we need to do something called composer, and we're going to look for GitHub repositories. And we see loading a package. Here it is under Get Composer, loading a package from a VCS repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my composer.json, maybe after the license line, doesn't matter where. First thing we're going to do is grab the URL to this. So we're going to say copy that, and I'm just going to delete that. And if we have a look at the documentation, we find that assume that you've got a patched branch named bugfix, and it's dev-bugfix. So what we now need to do is, and if we have a look at the composer on the web here, we can see it's Togonation PhpInfo. So what we now want to do is we want to go into our root of our CakePHP and say composer require, and it's going to be Togonation /PHPInfo and dev. Now, looking at the repository, we know that the only branch we've got is the master branch. So we just say dev-master. And then because it's in our composer and it knows where to get this Togonation PHP, it knows where to find it. It will download and install. And the beauty of it now, it's now in vendor files. So if we go scroll down, we find my GitHub handle and the name of the package, and it's all installed nicely for us. Now, if we go bin cake plugin loaded, we can see it's already loaded, and potentially the reason for that is that we look at application SRC, from the previous install, it had this add plugin method under the bootstrap method in SRC application. So that loads the plugin. If we comment that out you can see it disappears. So that's required to make sure the plugin is loaded, so Cake knows about it. Now from there, we now need to just test and see, have we broken everything or does it work? Let's see. And it's still working, but now it's being pulled from the vendor directory and not the directory where it was before. So that is a very brief video on embedding PhpInfo into a page and then moving all that into a plugin and publishing it and then bringing it back into your application via Composer. I hope it's useful to someone.